Hello and welcome. For today's video tutorial we're going to create a unisex bar bracelet. Now this features some lovely curvature which can be designed for whatever specific wrist size you're working towards. Let's head down to the board, take a look, and then we'll make one together. So this is the section we're going to be learning today for the unisex bar bracelet. I'm often asked if I can make jewellery that's accessible to gents as well as to ladies. So hopefully this will be suitable for absolutely everyone. So we're going to be working with some abacus shaped beads today. They're a little bit like rondelles, but they have flatter sides. I'm working with 4 by 7mm ocean jasper. I'm just going to pop this up into the corner for now. There we go. So we're going to be working with a single piece of 1mm or 18 gauge wire. I'm working with raw copper. My demonstration piece is some antique bronze. So we're going to start off in the middle and we'll warm that through. The length is between 12 and 15 inches. Any offcuts that you have, you can always use to add connectors to the end of your chain, so you can custom create them. You could of course just use jump rings if you prefer. So once you've warmed through that central section, we're going to add on some beads. You could work with 5 or you could work with 7. I think odd numbers look really nice in a design like this. And again, this is ocean jasper in 4 by 7mm. So I'm going to thread on the number of beads that I want for this design, and I think I'll go for 5 again. I just think it's a nice size. You can of course work with larger beads or with larger numbers, bearing in mind you will want to have a little bit of curvature so that it sits comfortably over the back of the wrist. So sitting those beads in the very centre of your length of wire, the first thing we're going to do is to turn angle changes on either side, and I'm going to use my flat facing pliers just to measure a distance of probably around 4mm past where the beads sit. Now the first bend, it doesn't really matter because they're still going to move around. What I do want is quite a sharp bend so that I can define the distance between that angle change and where the first bead sits. I'm going to allow 4mm, which will be 4 rotations of wire. So you can tape that into position, or you can just grip really firmly, pop your pliers across the wire again, and I'm going to draw the wire at the other end of that little bead stack in the opposite direction. Now, dependent on the drill holes in your beads, you could size this up to a heavier gauge wire as long as it's not too tight through those drill apertures, otherwise you'll struggle to get them to sit neatly without putting any stress on them. So in order to create loops at either end, I'm going to use my memory wire finishing pliers. You could use standard round nose pliers or multi-step bail makers. So I think because this is going to be quite a chunky one, I'm going to use the larger side, which is the 4mm side. I'm going to scoot all of those beads away, and then I'm just going to turn a nice round form on the end. So it's much easier to do when you don't have to think about lights and camera. Let's draw that all the way around. So you've got this really beautiful rounded form on the end there. Before we do anything else, I'm going to give that a bit of a strengthen. You could pop it onto a block and give it a gentle tap with hammer. I'm just going to open and close my pliers. One of the reasons I mentioned using a slightly heavier wire if you've got large hole beads is that this then becomes redundant. You don't need to kind of give it too much of a strengthen. 18 gauge 1mm wire is really useful because it sits at the perfect cusp between fluid enough to work but strong enough to exist once it's completed. So I'm going to do the exact same thing at the other end. So I'm just going to flip that over. I'm right dominant, so for me I will always show where my right hand is doing more of the work. My left hand also suffers from arthritis in various joints, so I tend to hold with my weaker hand and work with my stronger hand. So let's draw that wire all the way around, bring that back over the top. So you'll notice that the crossover sections of wire is on the top at both ends, even though the wires are moving in opposite directions. That is purposeful because I want the ends to be as symmetrically opposite as much as they can be identical. So I'll give that a quick squish. I've marked the wire slightly, so if I was making this as a commission, I would get my Dremel or a similar rotary polishing device, or even just some wet and dry sandpaper, and just buff that down. For today, I'm not going to let it worry me. For the next part of today's tutorial, we're going to add in our chain. Now you need to add in your chain at this moment, purely because it's just one less connection point. If you have ready-made chain, you can absolutely use whatever you fancy. I really like the juxtaposition of this beautiful copper, which will age darker, and a beautiful coated copper chain. Now, you might not want to use heart chain, but you can use any handmade chain or any ready-made chain that you like. You could even go the whole hog and check out my infinity chain tutorial. You can have a look at that just here and create something like this, which matches really beautifully with gents jewellery as well. So in order to add in our chain, we need to work out what kind of length of chain we need. Bearing in mind you're going to have a segment in the middle which is the size of your beads, plus around about 3/4 of an inch to allow the connection points and loops. Then you've got the chain, and then at the other end you will also need to minus off whatever clasp you're using and whatever hook attachment you're going to work those together. So this section equals almost 2 inches. So do bear that in mind when you're cutting your chain to add in to the loops at the end of this unisex bar bracelet. So I'm using a piece of scrap wire just to measure my 4 pieces of chain to make sure that they're all the same length. You don't have to double up your chain, I just think it looks quite nice and I wanted to show you how to achieve that. These bits of scrap wire, if you don't have any around, you can always use a head pin, but I end up with lots and lots of these from when I'm coming up with tutorials. For instance, this was on the menu today, but I actually prefer the project we've ended up with. So what we're going to do is I'll show you one end of adding in the chain and then we will move on. So let's take 2 pieces of chain. Again, you don't have to have 2. And if you wanted to go for that handmade chain look, there are various options on my channel. You can check out this playlist just here to see if there's a handmade chain you'd like to investigate further. So I've added in the chain that I want to use. So what we're going to do is to seal this inside that wrapped loop. So grip across your round form, don't press the chain, don't press where the wire crosses over itself. Naturally enough, the sticky outy bits do the work and grab onto everything. So I've wrapped 3 times to begin with, even though I've allowed space to do 4 wraps. I'm just going to bring that around, give that 3 wraps and tighten up those turns just to make sure that that's really neat and tidy and that everything is sitting. What I will then do is exactly the same thing at the other end, add on the chain and wrap around a couple of times. So I have been asked a number of times to make more jewellery for gentlemen or to make more masculine themed jewellery. Now I'm a huge proponent of the fact that if you have a body, you can put whatever jewellery you fancy on it. And if you've been watching the awards season over the last couple of years, you'll notice that gentlemen are being a little bit more adventurous with their jewellery choices. So when I say this is a unisex design, it just means that anybody can wear it. And I, as I say, strongly believe that anybody can wear whatever they want. There's a gentleman that comes into the shop where I work and he wears great big long dangly earrings like myself, and I say good for him. So you know, you can wear whatever you fancy and more power to you. Let's head back down to the board and we'll move on to the next stage of today's tutorial. So I've wrapped 3 times on either end. What I want to do now is just wrap, I think, probably 1 more full rotation at either end. And again, when you're working with the wire that is connected to this loop, you'll need to support this loop. Draw that all the way around 1 time. Make sure it's taut and firmly in position. Flip over and do exactly the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to grip across that loop, draw the wire all the way around 1 full rotation, and then we'll take a look at what kind of space we have. Now we left a 4mm gap, we've got 4 wraps, so that kind of equals up. There is a tiny gap, tiny little bit of movement, and we do need a little bit of movement in this design so that it enables both the wire to bend and those beads to remain unstressed. Ocean jasper is a really lovely strong gemstone to work with, eminently suitable at any time of the year, but I just adore the variation of colours in this gem. So what we're going to do now is to try not to catch those chains as we're working. Warm through the first section of wire that's sticking out. Now I quite like the angularity that we're going to achieve today with the corners in this design. So I'm going to use the very tip of my tapered bent chain nose pliers. I'm just going to draw that wire slightly backwards so that I can bring the tip just in between the bead and the wrap. So I just glint that in the light. I've just made a tiny bit of space. The reason I'm telling you this and also warming the wire through is so that when we push that wire over, we get a really nice, strong, square feeling to the design. Now you absolutely can make this super floaty and have ovals or any arcing shapes that you fancy, but today we're going for hard angular shapes. It reminds me a little bit of Art Deco also. So what we're going to do is repeat on the other end. I've just flipped it upside down, pull the bead slightly forwards and out of the way, get the tip of the pliers in there just between the bead and where the wire is coming away. Make sure that everything's toasty warm and then push firmly across the body of the design. So you've got these really strong corners. So just going to give that another warm through. Naturally enough, the chains do like to involve themselves in literally everything. Now when we get to the other end, we're going to give that another warm through and we're going to grip the tail of the wire that's passing by the end of the beads, pull the beads down again towards the base. But instead of getting the wire to cross over in exactly the same place, it's going to be just a tiny smidge further forwards, further away from me. The reason for this is when you draw that wire across, you want it to sit closer to the loop than the first angle you made, because we're going to wrap this tail around over the top in just a moment, and what we don't want to do is to have it going at a funny angle. We want to keep that squareness. So the next thing we're going to do is to grip that tail of wire long past the angle, and I'm just going to get that into position again and then lift it so you can see. I'm holding along the wire with my bent chain nose pliers. I'm then going to push the wire so that it goes around the wrapped loop neck. So can you see how that fits over the top? It's nice and square still. So if you feel that that is too far towards the loop, you have got an opportunity to just open that back slightly and then bring that down a little bit so that it sits more cleanly against that first angle. So before we start wrapping all the way around the neck of the wrapped loop, we're going to support again in exactly the same way as we did when we made that bend. And I'm just going to hold that whilst I take the wire across the back. Now the chains will get in the way. You can just move them out of the way in a second. So bring that all the way around and you can see we're starting to wrap around the wrapped loop neck. So once that first angle is in position, you can refine that slightly if you need to. When you start to bring this tail over the top again, which will be our next move, the likelihood is that this piece of wire will get drawn around the bend and we don't want it to. So you just need to find what grip is going to work best for you. I'm going to put my pliers across the corner of the bend here. Now the tip of the pliers is sitting against the wrap inside. And the reason it's doing that is because when I draw this tail of wire over the top one more time, the wire cannot be pulled because the pliers are preventing it from moving. So I'm going to push that across the back once, tighten everything up, and then we will trim away. So let's just flip this over. Now you see this length of wire on the end. I'm going to use that to make a clasp for my design. There are many different types of clasps that you can make. You could go for a simple S clasp like this one. You could make yourself a nice little J clasp. These things have different names all over the place. This is very, very old. I wore this to the premiere of Logan, the film in the United Kingdom in 2017, I want to say. Or you can make a doubled up clasp like this. Multiple choices. I've got a video for you just there if you need to check that out. Now we're on the underside of the design. If you remember when we started, we had the wire swooping away around over the top. And that's what gives us this really beautiful finish. So if we flip to the underside, what we're going to do is to trim that tail of wire away. Keep hold of this for making clasps. And then what we need to do is to just push that tail down. So I'm going to give it a squish. I'm going to support that wrap whilst I'm doing it. Give it a bit of a squish. And then that tail just sits down smoothly so that it's a double wrap design. You have a wrapped loop and then you've doubled over the top with a second little spiral of wire. So just tighten everything up, make sure it sits neatly, and then repeat at the other end. So if you wanted to, all you need to do is just add in some jump rings or some split rings to finish those ends off. But I am going to show you very quickly how you can close the ends of the chain up, and then we'll move on to forming that curvature in the back of the bar. So if you are going to use 2 lengths of chain and they are an interesting chain that needs to be sitting in a particular way, just grip hold of them and make sure that they look nice side by side. Sometimes they will just fall weirdly and you won't want that set with the connector at the other end. This one is fairly well behaved, doesn't really matter. So all I'm doing is a variation of a rosary link, and you can check out my video there on rosary linking. Basically, we're going to do a wrapped loop on one end, and then I've got a little J clasp on the other end. So let's just slide this in both of those pieces of chain round into that loop. And what you need to do is just maybe open the loop up slightly. Just make sure that the chain sits nicely side by side before you seal that up. If there are any questions in your mind, just take it off and start again. I'm going to run with it because otherwise we'll be here forever. And just to show you on the other end, I've done a simple rosary connector. Wrapped loop on the 2mm pin connecting the chains. I've added another one of those little Abacus ocean jasper beads, and then the 4mm pin on the other end to make sure that my clasp will fit into that. So all you would then do is just close up the wrapped loop, just draw that around the core. Now sometimes if it's cold or your wire is hard or old, you may need assistance just to finish that off. So you can always grab in a second pair of pliers. I'm not putting pressure on the chain. I'm not putting pressure where the wires cross over. I'm going to bring in some chain nose pliers now, make sure my clasp is in position, and then I'm just going to draw that tail all the way around. So I'm supporting the loop, which is where this wire comes from. If you grip the other end, everything will spin and you'll end up weakening the wire. So I'm just going to chase this all the way until the end sits flush down on the center core of that wire. Let's just flip that over to the other side. And then give it a squish to make it sit down neat and tidy. You could also just polish that out slightly, but the idea is that that cut end sits really, really neatly, doesn't stick up, won't catch on your skin. So let's have a look at what that looks like. I just need to close up this J clasp slightly to make sure that it goes through the loop we created at the other end. So there's your finished bracelet connections. What we're going to do now is to assess which way looks neatest, and we decided that that was the up. Let's just make sure that that last little bit of wire sits down neatly as well. And then when you're happy that you've got the up facing up, double check. Actually, I think that's the up. Do double check first. Make sure that your lines are exactly where you want them to be. So I'm just going to refine that slightly. Make sure there's nothing going wrong. When you're happy with the bar section of your unisex bar bracelet, what we're going to do is just put a little bit of warmth into the whole thing. And then very, very softly, because we left some gaps between those beads, you can get a little bit of a curve to it. Now you can even curve that bar as well. And that's the joy of using a 1mm wire. It's flexible enough to do what you want it to do and strong enough to stay put once it cools down. So that's slightly elevated in the middle and you've got a curve, and that will then sit on the back of the wrist really neatly. So I have really stupidly small wrists, so that just slides on. I don't need to undo the clasp. The other one on me is ridiculously huge. So if you do need to take it apart to shorten it, you've got options. You can do that on both sides, or you can just shorten one side. What you can't do is undo this end. You can do those again. Thanks so much for watching the Jem Hawkes YouTube channel today. I hope that you've enjoyed this bracelet tutorial today with that bar design. Endlessly, as ever, customizable to what you want to make with it. They make really nice little drop pendants as well. You can make them as feminine or as masculine as you like. If you've enjoyed today's tutorial, please do drop me a like and subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. Leave me a hype if you feel so inclined, as it helps me to be seen by the wider YouTube community. Have yourself a beautiful day. And as this design was a request from a viewer, please don't forget that you can request future tutorials down in the comments below. Have a beautiful day. Bye bye.